Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of our witnesses for your testimony today and for your great work. I want to start with you, Secretary Buttigieg, because for years, New Hampshire has had the lowest apportionments in the country from federal formula grant programs administered by the Federal Transit Administration and the Highway Administration. And just to give you some example, in 2021, we received roughly $181 million in federal highway funding. Now, that's the lowest in the country and far less than our neighboring state of Vermont, which received roughly $222 million. Now, I would never suggest that the state of Vermont, home to my neighboring senators and, of course, the chairman of this committee, doesn't deserve that $222 million. I just want to know how New Hampshire can get parity with what's happening with the rest of the country. And I know that Congress and the department have been reluctant to open up formula issues in the past, but at this point, we need to do something about the lack of parity. So can you talk about how you see maybe approaching that issue and what measures and formula factors might help address those inequities?
Well, thank you for the question, and certainly it would be so important not only in the context of the jobs plan, but our ongoing work to make sure that there's a sense of equitable distribution of these funds. And I'd be eager to spend a little more time understanding some of the dynamics that have led to this disparity that you're discussing in New Hampshire. What I would say is that we think we should always be looking both at the way we do things and at the discretionary programs that are opening up, especially as we're working to make sure that the terms of the discretionary programs reflect public policy priorities that I know are important in New Hampshire around economic security, as well as things like climate readiness and equity. And so would welcome a chance to discuss this further and look at what we can do so that no one living in any state of the U.S. would wonder whether their home area is getting a fair share.
Thank you. You will hear from us.
Understood.
Administrator Regan, I'm very pleased that the American Jobs Plan calls for $10 billion for drinking water specifically to address PFAS pollution, which has turned up in a number of communities in New Hampshire and and caused significant problems. And as you know, is a big issue, becoming a bigger issue around the country. Can you talk about more specifics around how that $10 billion is going to be used and give us some assurances that it's going to be available to some of those households who depend on private wells that have been contaminated through PFAS?
Well, thank you for that question. And unfortunately, too many of us have firsthand experience with the devastation of PFAS in our drinking water and what it means for public health and also what it means for economic impact to many of our local communities. That money specifically will focus on monitoring and remediating these pervasive problems that we're seeing all across the country. EPA has prioritized the PFAS topic from day one. We're looking forward and moving aggressively to setting a drinking water standard. We're also looking at partnering with many communities all across the country to think about how we can do a better job monitoring these pervasive chemicals and also remediating in the areas that are in most need.
And so will there be help available to private well owners who have been affected by PFAS in some form?
Small water systems, households, I believe we may be considering private wells. I'll have to take a look at that. But we do know that this problem has been particularly impactful in our rural communities, which will have a tremendous amount of private well owners as well.
Well, thank you. I hope that will be something that you'll look at as part of providing help. You talked about the standards that EPA is still trying to determine. That's created a real challenge for us in New Hampshire. Our first identification of PFAS pollution was at the former Pease Air Force Base, and the Air Force has been very accommodating and coming in and trying to help address remediation there. But one of the challenges has been the difference between the EPA standard, which is, I think, 70 parts per trillion, and the standard that's been set by New Hampshire's Department of Environmental Services, which is much lower than that. So can you talk about how you're looking at that standard and when you expect to have something that might be more in keeping with what's happening across the rest of the country?
Absolutely. I think that the federal government is playing catch up to where many of the states have had to step in. So we've ramped up the machinery. We're moving as aggressively as we can, taking a look at what progressive states have done, like my home state of North Carolina and others, to address this. But look at where the science is also leading us so that we can set a level playing field across all of our states. In addition to that, in addition to looking at the science, looking at what the other states are doing, and preparing for setting of standards, we're in conversations with the Department of Defense as well to better understand all of the players and what we need to do to address these pervasive contaminants as quickly as possible.
Well, thank you. I look forward to seeing what the EPA comes up with, and as you point out, it's a huge issue.